Poor Sergei and Alexander. What will we do without them? We've got liberals, Remainers, maniacs calling for Russians to be deported, all of their property confiscated, irrespective of their relationship or not to the government in Russia. The same people that accused Nigel Farage of wanting to deport Poles now want to deport Russians. The Oprah Winfrey story may even be apocryphal, but we're in circumstances, in an atmosphere in which it's all too believable, isn't it? When people who will happily allow the head-chopping saw men of the Saudi Arabian dictatorship to own two top football clubs, Sheffield United and Newcastle United, we're not even going to play Russia. We'll allow Israel, which has been an illegal occupation of Palestine and other lands for decade after decade, more than half a century, in fact. We'll allow them into UEFA, but UEFA has banned Russia. Manchester United, my own team, has sacked Aeroflot and is instead dependent on the tender mercies now of various other corporate clients and indeed the billionaire Americans, the Glazers. You couldn't make this up. Although an awful lot of stuff is being made up. They say that the first casualty of war is truth, and my goodness, haven't we been treated to that over the last couple of days? I'm sick of seeing President Zelensky of the Ukraine at the front line in the trench wearing his flak jacket and his tin hat, except all of those pictures are from years gone by and have nothing whatsoever to do with the current conflict in Ukraine. We've had all sorts. We've had a ghost pilot who was spoofed on Twitter. His identity revealed, but he was some obscure actor wearing specs. We've had the ghost ship that told the Russian warship to F off before going into Davy Jones's locker, though that never happened. We've had Snake Island, where all the defenders announced and broadcast, and Zelensky began organizing their funerals, that they would die there on Snake Island, although all 18 of them surrendered and were treated with due respect and are all alive and well, watching the president of Ukraine organizing their funerals on television. We've even had a guy, Bernie Gores, a CNN journalist, who's died again. He first was killed in Afghanistan in 2016. I'm not making this up. That's Bernie Gores of CNN. He was first killed in 2016 in Afghanistan, and now he's been killed again in the Ukraine in 2022. R.I.P. Bernie, again. I mean, really, you couldn't make it all up, although they are. This is a war in 2022, in the era of digital, where everyone has got a camera phone. It's a war where there's no footage of actually any war. Of course, the Russian forces have invaded Ukraine, that much is sure, but where's all the fighting? Where's all the footage? Do you ever get suspicious when fake footage is the only footage you're seeing? Like the Russian tank that turned out to be a Ukrainian armored personnel carrier running over a Ukrainian driver's car, or the Russian missile that turned out to be a Ukrainian buck that hit the corner of a Ukrainian house, where fires are shown that actually are not even in Ukraine, where a woman is on the front page of every newspaper in the world, a bloodied woman in white bandages holding her face. Poor soul. I said it at the time when that picture was first published, after a gas explosion in Bulgaria in 2018. All these canards, all this disinformation is, of course, par for the course. None of the people who pervade it are going to be banned from the airwaves or algorithmed or suppressed. None of these people will be called an enemy agent. None of the liars that lied, the sewers that carried their lies, all the poor idiots who believed it all, none of them will face any consequences for it. But others may very well do so. Who would have thought that one of the benefits of Brexit would be that the Russian broadcaster RT would now survive in Europe only in the United Kingdom, the last outpost of freedom of speech. Britain, the only place where you can now watch RT, all in the interests, of course, of freedom and liberty. The EU ban on RT is in breach of its own charter, which guarantees as a fundamental right the freedom of speech and expression. The British Foreign Secretary, I can hardly believe I'm saying this, is somebody called Liz Truss, who announced today on television that the government would support British citizens who want to go to Ukraine and fight, even though that's illegal in Britain, even though people who went to fight to defend the Kurds against ISIS are currently in prison in Britain, having been convicted of traveling to fight in a foreign war. And what about all these other types that would love to go and fight for ISIS and come back again? What about the people who want to go to Gaza and fight for the Hamas and come back again? Is the government going to support them? What about the flags of Palestine that were banned at Celtic Park, a club which was then fined £80,000 because its supporters held up Palestinian flags? Well, Ukrainian flags are being given out by the football authorities. The United Arab Emirates has been bombing the most devastated people on the earth in Yemen for the last almost 10 years. 80,000 children have been killed. 500,000 people have been killed. The UAE is banning them. The UAE owns Manchester City Football Club, which yesterday had a full-scale jamboree against bombing in Ukraine, whilst their owners, members of the royal family of the UAE, are massacring people in Yemen. And most of the poor fools in the enclosure, in the stand, on the terracings, don't even know. And most of those that know apparently don't care. Now, I never expected the Russians to invade Ukraine. I'm bitterly sorry that this has happened. I know about war much more than most of the armchair generals currently opining on it. I've been in many, many war zones. I've even been under aerial bombardment. I know what it's like to press your face into the earth and wish your nose would be able to dig you deeper as the shrapnel, red hot, razor sharp, cascaded around. I know all about these things. But as I once said famously in my biggest ever video during the Israeli invasion of Lebanon in 2006, history doesn't begin when Sky News arrives. The clock doesn't start ticking from the moment that CNN roll up. I could go back a long way for the cause of where we are today, but I only have time to go back to 2014. That's the proximate date when this conflict started in Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia. When the elected government of Ukraine was overthrown in a violent, fascistic coup organized to the nth degree by the United States Embassy and its then ambassador, Victoria Nuland. The government was overthrown. The elected president was chased from the country. The parliament was set on fire. The MPs at gunpoint had to pass legislation banning the use of the Russian language, a language spoken by almost a third of the population of Ukraine. That coup was spearheaded. Its vanguard was the right sector and the Azov battalion, jackbooting, swastika-wearing, SS insignia-bearing, fully fledged Nazis, worshippers of the Jew killer Bandera, who sent scores of thousands of Ukrainian and Polish Jews to their deaths in the death camps, those that he and his followers hadn't set upon and murdered on the streets of Ukraine, even before the SS arrived. If you think that Russia can be unmoved, sanguine about such things, you know nothing about history, never mind about Russian history. So what happened next? The people of eastern Ukraine said, up with this, we will not put. We elected that president. We elected that government. You've just overthrown it. You've just banned our language and our culture, and we will not accept it. So we are going to set up self-declared republics in the Donbass. The Ukrainians then moved their military, including their fascist vanguard, and shelled them for 8 long years. 8. Killing 14,000 Ukrainian citizens. They were bombing their own people. Remember that refrain? They were bombing their own people for 8 years. They killed 14,000, many of them women and children. And today's journalists and broadcasters didn't give a toss about it. They didn't even report it. Never mind feel the pain of the bereaved, feel the pain of the murdered and the maimed. They didn't give a damn about it. Neither did the policy makers in the West. In fact, they continued to pump full that Ukraine coup regime with NATO and EU money, weapons, and propaganda support. The Russians never recognized those self-declared republics. But when it became clear, as I predicted to you last week that it might, that a general offensive to massacre the people there, 14,000 dead over 8 years, do the maths. But a massacre, a full-scale assault, well, as I said to you last week, Russia could not possibly stand idly by while that happened. And so we have now what we have. The Russian war aims are today what they were before the war began. They have not changed. They have not ramped up. They haven't called for the overthrow of the puppet President Zelensky, the new pin-up boy of NATO and Western governments. They don't want to regime change the government of Ukraine. They don't want to annex the Ukraine to Russia. They don't want any of the things that are normally involved when one country invades another, like NATO invaded Yugoslavia, for example. The war aims are simple. They are twofold. That the Ukraine must be demilitarized and denazified, and two, that it must be a neutral state, i.e., that it will never join NATO. So we're now at the brink of World War III because a country of which Americans in particular know nothing, and British people overwhelmingly know nothing, we may very well be on the brink of a European war, which could become a world war, a European war which could become a nuclear war very, very easily, because in the last few days, Germany and others, what could possibly go wrong? Germany tooling up to fight Russia. What could possibly go wrong? Why would the Russians possibly be concerned about that? All so that we don't allow the Ukrainian government to say that it will remain neutral, that it won't join NATO. You seriously want a European or a world war over that? Are you ready for your son to die over that, in defiance of that demand? Really? Are you? But of course you won't be. You want to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood, you cowards. If you wanted to fight Russia, why don't you fight Russia yourselves? Why are you forcing Ukraine? It's like a big bully pushing a little boy into a fight with a bigger boy. If you want to fight Russia, why don't you fight it? You cowards. You want to fight Russia to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. If you don't want Russia to fight Ukraine, stop using Ukraine to fight Russia. It's really that simple. Everything I've said in the last 20 minutes could be encapsulated in that one sentence. If you don't want Russia to fight Ukraine, stop making Ukraine fight Russia on your behalf. That's the long and the short of it. Now, in the course of the next 3 hours, we'll hear your views, we'll hear the views of others, perhaps about the hypocrisy of glorifying Molotov cocktails, glorifying the right of an occupied people to fight its occupier by force of arms. You know, as long as it's only in the Ukraine and not in Palestine, as long as it's only in the Ukraine and not in Yemen, then you'll be a terrorist. And anyone that glorifies you in Britain, at least, will go to prison for the glorification of terrorism. There's so much more I could say. I'll close with this. I very much hope that these negotiations bear fruit. But if they do not, then I feel sure, though I don't speak for Russia and I don't know their mind on this, but I feel sure that having been backed into a corner by NATO expansion, Russia has decided, as it did at Stalingrad, that this far and no further. We will retreat no further. And from now on, we will give as good as it gets. Starting, I hope, with the expulsion of every single European Union broadcaster from Russia immediately on the next plane. Bye-bye.